Hi everyone, it's Kathy and I am back today doing another collaboration with my friend Marla over at Mad About Cards and Crafts. And our collaboration this month is to use stamps from Purple Onion Designs. Apparently both of us are big fans of Purple Onion Designs and both of us have a lot of their stamps. So we decided to do that for this month. I started out with a piece of Cougar Super Smooth cardstock and I die cut it using the wonky stitched rectangle dies from Whimsy Stamps. And then I had a piece of just regular printer paper and I used a circle die to die cut a circle out of that. I traced the circle onto the Cougar Super Smooth cardstock just so I would know where to stamp my little bunny. And I was also going to be using that printer paper as a stencil. So I used my 2A glue pen and applied that just around the very edge of the circle. With 2A glue pen, and the one that I use is a Zig 2A glue pen, once it's dry, it becomes repositionable. The trick is you want to make sure that it is completely dry before you put it on top of your cardstock to do any stenciling or masking. I set that stencil aside to dry and then I stamped my little bunny within the circle that I had traced with a pencil onto the die cut rectangle. And then I made sure to erase the pencil because if you color on top of a pencil mark, the ink gets trapped underneath, so make sure that you erase before you start coloring. I used My Favorite Things Extreme Black Hybrid ink to stamp my little bunny, and then I started doing the Copic coloring. I have this sped up a lot because this poor bunny ended up with a splotch in the middle of his face and I really tried hard to fix it, but to no avail. There was just no fixing it and I didn't want to start over completely, and I'm going to show you in just a little bit here how I did end up fixing this. I did consider taking all of this out of the video because who wants to watch me color something horribly and have it turn out with a big splotch in the middle of his face. But I decided that I was going to leave it in because I wanted you to see the process of how I started the coloring, how I really tried hard to fix the coloring, and finally decided that I'm going to have to fix it a different way. So the Copic colors that I used will be listed in the description box below, and I'll also link to the individual products that I used as well. For his little t-shirt, I started out with G05 and did that on the outer edges so that the outer edges would be a little bit darker. And then I blended that out with YG05. And for the stripes, I started with BG53, but it wasn't quite bright enough. So I switched out to a B06. And and his little shirt is pretty small and those stripes are really very thin, so I wasn't going to try and do anything fancy with the blue marker. I colored in his ears with R20 and R00. Then I start coming back in with my markers to try and fix this. I'm trying so hard to blend out the splotch in the middle of his face and lighten up the areas on the outer edges of the sides of his face. And it just wasn't happening. And I know that what happened was that I jumped from an E43 to an E41, and I think the jump was too much, and it didn't necessarily blend anything. It just kind of modeled all of the coloring. So when I come back in and try and fix it, I try to go over that E41 with E42, and all that did was model it even more. So I finally decided that I am just going to stamp a new bunny and I'm just going to color his face and his ears. I started with E44 and added that around the outer edges of his face, at the bottom of his ears, and then on one of his ears I pulled the E44 up pretty far. And then above his nose, what I did different this time was I just did a tiny little line instead of flicking way up. The first time I tried to color his little face, I was trying to make it appear that the bridge of his nose was pushed back. And it was too dark, it was too big, and I didn't have the angle right because his head is kind of tilted so it looks like he's kind of looking off to the side. So the next color that I came in with was E43, and I blended out the E44. And I'm doing flicking motions, but I'm turning the paper so that the flicking motions kind of are more consistent. I know it sounds weird that I'm turning the paper to get them more consistent, but that just is how it worked out for me. With the E42, I did blend out that little stripe over the top of his nose, and then I came in with E42 and blended all of it out together. And then I just colored the inside of his ears again with the R00 and the R20. And you can see I put the two bunnies next to each other, and you can see the difference, especially that splotch right in the middle of his face. So I was much happier with that. So moving right along, after I was done coloring the second bunny's head, I put a mask over the bunny on the rectangle panel that I had die cut. And then I put the circle stencil from my printer paper over on top of that and did some ink blending. And for the ink blending, I used Memento Summer Sky Ink with a makeup blending brush. And I wanted the color to be very concentrated more along the bottom and kind of up around the side a little bit. So I went in with a pretty heavy hand, and then as I moved up, I came in with a lighter hand and added, less ink to the brush. If I did add more ink to the brush, I would start in the darker area and then continue to blend it up so it would kind of fade off. And then I removed the circle mask and then removed the mask over the bunny and set that off to the side so that I could stamp and color my balloon. And again, I used Cougar Super Smooth cardstock with my favorite things, Extreme Black Hybrid ink. For the balloon, I started with G05, and I just did, the very bottom where you would have the knot in the little bottom part of that balloon. And then I extended the G05 up around the sides of the balloon, but I didn't have that color go all the way up against the stamped image. I left a tiny little bit of white space in between the G05 and the stamped line. Then I came in with YG05 and blended that out and kind of just kept filling in until I had like a little white circle in the center. And then I finished up with YG03 and filled in all of the white space that I had left. After I was done coloring the balloon, I set that aside, and I noticed that I had a few spots around my bunny that had a little bit of a white halo where I didn't have the mask lined up perfectly. So I just colored that in really quick with a B00 marker. It was close enough to the ink that I had used, and you really can't tell that I colored that in. So that's one way to fix those halos that end up around a masked image. If there is one, you just choose a marker that's close to the ink color that you used and fill those in. Then I fussy cut the little bunny's head, and it actually, I think, turned out well that I really messed up the first coloring because I wanted to add a balloon string to the balloon. So I put the balloon above the bunny where I wanted it, and then I used a black fine tip pen and was able to draw my balloon string right over the badly colored bunny head. And then when I glued the better colored bunny head on top of that, it covered the balloon string that I drew, so it kind of looks like the balloon string is falling behind his head and then coming forward and landing in his hand. I did fussy cut the balloon as well and put a couple pieces of foam tape on the back side of that. Next, I adhered the stamped panel to a piece of patterned cardstock, which was cut with the largest wonky stitched rectangle die from Whimsy Stamps. And then I adhered that to the front of a top folding A2 size note card. I added a little bit of shimmer to the balloon with my Wink of Stella glitter pen, and then I used a white gel pen to add a highlight to my balloon. At this point I thought I was done, and then I laid awake last night trying to figure out how to finish it because it really wasn't done. So I stamped the sentiment "Hooray" off screen and die cut it with my Blueprints 27 fishtail banner die, and used lime Rickey ink from Catherine Pooler Designs and a little yellow sponge just to add a little bit of color around the edge, just so the banner would stand out just a little bit more. I used my tape runner to adhere that down, and I kind of fussed with the placement and decided it needed to go a little bit lower. And then voila, I actually finished the inside of the card, although it's a good thing that this is handmade because, yep, I stamped the sentiment crooked. So I thought, no big deal. I'll stamp a color of balloons to draw your eye away from it. And I don't really like the placement of the balloons. But since I'm not going to color them in, I figured, they'll work well enough. And again, it's handmade, it's not Hallmark, and I can't coin that phrase, you guys. I heard it on another video, and I can't remember who it was, but whoever said that, thank you for that phrase, because it definitely came in handy for this one here. Anyway, thank you so much for joining me. Make sure you check out Marla's video. I'll have that linked in the description below for you. And if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. If you've not yet subscribed, I'd love it if you would. And don't forget to ring the bell so you're notified every time a new video is posted. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time.